All right. Thank you guys for joining us today for an InHand Networks webinar on the NDTU series for Industrial Cellular Modem. At the end of this session, we'll be doing questions and answers. So, I ask that you keep all your questions to the end, and then you can always go into the chat box and drop it in, or the Q&A section from your Zoom control bar. So thank you guys for joining us today. And since it's 2:01, we'll go ahead and get this started. So the speaker is myself. My name is Kenneth Hunter. I'm the VP of Sales at InHand Networks. And the agenda we're going to be covering today is InHand narrowband NDTU products, an overview of eMTC, also known as Category M1, and narrowband IoT. And then last, we'll cover typical NDTU applications. So the narrowband product that we're launching is the NDTU. The NDTU332 is an industrial cellular router modem. If you're kind of curious what's a DTU, it stands for Data Terminal Unit. So think of taking old legacy serial equipment and then converting that over to a WAN such as the cellular network. Just a quick overview, we got LTE Category M1 and narrowband supported on one SKU, protocol conversions, Modbus RTU to TCP, IEC 101 and 104. It's essentially the European version of DMP3 for those of you familiar with grid protocols. It's EMC level 3, IP30 with a wide range of temperatures, and we have a lot of different easy remote management tools. So as I just mentioned, for this data terminal unit, traditionally what you'll have is serial devices. We all know that there's many legacy devices out there. And in a lot of verticals such as the utility space, industrial space, the serial devices have not all gone away yet, and there are still hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them out there. However, a lot of the complexities of, IoT, integrating in remote sites, remote data, moving it over a cellular or a radio network, it's really expanded a lot of the capabilities for how we manage, our remote devices for control, for monitoring. So the NDTU series was essentially built with this in mind. Take simple data and then move it out to some type of server or cloud-based system. As far as what we've done with the NDTU series, I'll go ahead and tell you that on a global scale, we've had this product line for quite a while. The main reason that you haven't really seen it in North America yet is because it was mostly for 2G and 3G back during the hype of serial. But we have more than 800,000 of these NDTUs deployed globally. Many different certifications, and with our new SKU that supports Category M1 and narrowband IoT networks, with Verizon and AT&T, it's the perfect time for us to launch and bring this, so more people can see the value of, what was seen in the 2G and 3G days. As far as the actual design of the equipment, it's an industrial grade piece with a very wide range for temperatures all the way down to -40. An EMC level 3. This makes it very ideal for industrial environments, and also probably one of the most popular uses were in grid applications connecting to RTUs. So I'm not going to read off the specs to you, but the idea of now with the Category M and narrowband IoT is that instead of having to upgrade your serial devices to bring them into the age of IoT, essentially you can deploy an NDTU series, get the same connectivity that you would expect from an Ethernet device, do the protocol conversions, and provide years of reliable connectivity, because M1 and narrowband are looking at a 10 to 15-year life cycle. So it's very long. Don't expect to see what you saw with 2 and 3G, where all of a sudden you're scrambling to convert. Another feature that comes with it is low power consumption, 10 milliamps at 12 volts, and then working, fully pumping out data at 45 milliamps at 12 volts. So this makes it a very popular option in power automation, municipal, environmental monitoring, weathering stuff where you're going to be depending on solar or on batteries, where, every watt counts. The other piece, as with all of our network products, is we focus a lot on high reliability and trying to give you that always on connectivity. So we have watchdogs on the software side and on the hardware side. So that way you don't have, one of your connectivity products getting essentially, as they call it, hung or frozen. It's going to detect if there's any issues at the firmware or the hardware level and do a restart on its own. No sending someone out to pull the power and recycle it, because of some bug or hang, in one of those two situations. Multiple layer link detection mechanisms and auto recovery. So it's always continuously going to be checking your tunnels. It's going to be checking your different connectivities. It's going to be going through and continuously checking for failures. So that way, if a link goes down, it can go ahead and restart it, run some troubleshooting tools, and then pull it back up. And also, we do have a dual SIM option. So if you're using different carriers or two separate networks for an additional layer of redundancy, that's built in as well. Now, for the remote management of the NDTU products, we have quite a few tools that are very popular to use. The NDTU tool, you just connect it locally to a serial port on your PC. It's very simple and easy to configure. This isn't a router product, so don't expect all the complexity of having to go in and set up routing tables or do different subnets. No, it's just simply go in and just a very few number of things that you would need to address. Our tools is a remote tool if you have a private network or if you're using public IPs or private IPs, and you can just directly go to it. It's a nice tool to remotely go through and do the same thing you would with NDTU tool. Device Manager, probably many of you have dealt with or seen, is our standard, router and network device management tool hosted on AWS. You can go in and do batch updates, configurations, see the status of them, what's online, what's offline. And then we did have an SMS feature built into the DTU, but because of the constructs of the M1 network itself and narrowband IoT, those networks don't support SMS, so you won't really be able to use it in North America unless you're deploying a 3G device somewhere else. Additionally, we have two different serial interfaces on the NDTU, so that way you can not only have one port for your communication, getting the data from your end device, from your sensor equipment, from your terminal, but also one for maintenance. So even while the device is running, just like having two Ethernet ports on a router, you can go in and do your troubleshooting. Intelligent protocol processing. So what makes this more than just a standard modem? Why is it a data terminal, unit? Is that we do have some protocol conversions already built in. Obviously, for the industrial space, Modbus RTU, to Modbus TCP is probably one of the most common set of protocol conversions dealing with the serial device. That's already in there. We also, for Europe, support IEC 101 to 104 conversion. And then DMP3 is something that's being worked on right now. It's coming. So if you have customers or you are a customer in the utility space and DMP3 is what you use, look no further because we're going to be having that conversion feature. And also we support user-defined, TCP and UDP login, RB data packets, on-site identification, and leak maintenance. So that way you can go in and do stuff with TCP. You don't have to use just protocols. Now, if it's such a great product and we've got so many of them out there, why are we now talking about it in the States? Well, as I mentioned earlier, because of the category M1 network and narrowband IoT coming out, it's the perfect application, the perfect time, to bring back this serial product and essentially introduce it to the market. So for those of you who are not too familiar with them, we'll give you a little bit of insight into, what is M1 and what is narrowband, how much is kind of in place now, and, what are the projections and expectations from the market moving forward for the cellular carriers. So the big thing on it is that you're going to see extended coverage because they use lower frequencies on the towers. So they actually get further distance, better building and, penetration. They get, they can maintain far more connections on the same towers. Also the devices and the towers, it's more low cost and low power consumption. So if you look at, some of the graphs we have here right now, you know, as far as last year goes, obviously your standard networks, 2G, 3G, and 4G, you know, massively outnumber the category M1 and narrowband. But the projections, at least from the carriers, is that, you know, we're going to see a change in that by 2025, because all these low data, low cost devices, you know, they can be deployed in such a larger scale at such a lower cost that there's a high expectation to see a huge shift into, you know, these lower bandwidth networks. As far as the advantages between M1 and narrowband, M1 tends to have a higher speed. It's better for mobile applications, location tracking. It also supports voice. I mean, you can see that on M1, the network itself has a max speed of 1 megabyte per second. Now, obviously, equipment will play a piece of that. That's in a laboratory in the perfect conditions, but this just kind of gives you an idea of the data speeds. For narrowband IoT, it's a little bit slower, up to 250 kbps. The cost is better. And also it has a better range. You know, most of you who've dealt with cellular products know when you start getting around, you know, negative 60 to negative 80 dB for your signal strength, you start to have a little bit of flaky connections. It's not as stable, and then you'll start to lose connectivity. But because these are operating at such a lower frequency from the tower, you actually get out with M1 to 156 and narrowband 164. So you can almost double, and in some cases come close to tripling, you know, the distance between your device and the tower and being able to maintain a stable connection. Also, M1 does support cell handover. So once again, we mentioned it's a little better for mobile applications. But this is just kind of a general overview of the differences between the two. And to put it into more of a graphical context, as far as applications, you know, very common for narrowband would be fixed assets like power metering. You're looking at very low data. You know, the latency is actually better on M1 and narrowband in some instances compared to 3G network. The pipeline management, weather stations, parking, home automation, it's all fixed applications. Whereas M1 is going to be more toward, you know, fleet management, asset tracking, you know, the grid and utilities on a lot of different solar applications, wind, renewable energies. Home security is another good place. And as far as the coverage goes globally, this will give you a little bit of perspective on, you know, where is M1 sitting right now, where is narrowband, and, you know, what regions are essentially doing both. Now, I can tell you from my personal conversations with some of the carriers that Verizon is preparing to launch narrowband IoT coming up here soon. T-Mobile, I believe, has already launched it. I know that in Canada, we've already seen some of the major carriers pushing the M1 network. You know, AT&T has already launched M1 in Mexico. And Europe is very, 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 very heavy in narrowband IoT. So if you have any customers or, you know, end users in that area, it's very ideal. And as far as what you can expect to see, you know, there's 30 plus mainstream operators in the world who've launched 60 cellular networks, including narrowband and Cat M1. There are 47 commercial networks and 13 commercials, you know, 8 operators simultaneously supporting both. So it's a growing thing. Every year they add more and more. And then now we'll kind of roll into your typical NDTU application. So I've told you about the DTU product. I told you about the M1 and the narrowband network and why those two are important. So now we're just going to dig down a little bit deeper into, you know, what are some of the applications. So obviously, since a lot of our global market share is tied into the grid, smart grid has obviously been a huge player in the number of DTUs launched in the past and will be in the DTUs launch moving forward. So, you know, I won't dig into it too deep here, but traditionally, you know, from distribution automation to, you know, microgrids, EV charging, metering gateways, you know, some in transmission, definitely in renewables. A lot of these different applications introducing more power. You need higher levels of control, more nodes for monitoring. And obviously right now in the grid, you know, a lot of people will be dealing with 3G to 4G migration. So, you know, for them to be able to take a network that's not only going to be around longer than the 3G network was, but also is segmented separately on different frequencies and a different software layer from the actual towers, you know, it's going to give them better service from the carriers, because essentially when 1 million people are on their 4G smartphones, you know, it's not on the same network as the M1 and the narrowbands are. So as far as success stories, I mentioned we've done more than 800,000 out there. One of our earlier customers and a huge proponent of the DTU was a lot of the different utility companies in Asia. Traditionally, they connected to some type of TTU, FTU, RTU, you know, just simple, pull the data, send it back to either 1 or up to 5 data centers. You know, the DTU has the capabilities to send to more than 1. And it's just low cost, low power, very simple to use. So this is a very common application you will see, you know, in the metering side, automation and control for the grid, because you have so many different points distributed so far over a geographical location. So as I mentioned, remote power meter reading. So to actually pull the metering, you know, efficient unmanned meter reading through the remote network. It's industrial grade because it's high EMC level. You don't have to worry about a lot of the surge or electrostatic or electromagnetic interference that would come from being around a lot of, you know, high power applications. Street light monitoring has been a big thing as cities, you know, look to improve their efficiencies and their power consumption on their lighting, and also on management of their lighting when they come on, changes for time of year, you know, the ability to connect with Modbus or TCP, you know, a transparent transmission, you know, makes it very simple, easy to connect to this old legacy equipment that already has serial equipment, so they don't have to go in and then upgrade every controller that they have for, you know, their lighting applications. Remote monitoring of hydraulic systems, you know, these are fixed assets, so they're not going anywhere. You know, monitoring of rainwater, water levels, you know, the level of water for river dams, how much coming through, you know, LTE, having backups and multiple layers. It's providing redundant communications because obviously the amount of water is going to have an impact on the community nearby. Pollution source monitoring is another one. I mean, I can say that for a fact here in the States over the last 10 to 12 years, we've seen a lot of increased regulations on actual, you know, factories, manufacturing, you know, even natural resources such as the coal industry, oil and gas. So as these regulations increase, part of it, what comes with them is you have to be able to monitor, keep databases tracking different levels of pollutants, how it was treated, how it was transported. So obviously the M1 is a very low cost, you know, easy to use solution for these kind of applications. And of course, remote monitoring of weather stations, you know, these are more mobile as they might be deployed to one area for maybe a month and then move to another, or they could be a fixed weather station, you know, sitting in a place like in Iceland for 10 years, you know. And having that additional range of the category M1 or the narrow band, so you can be further away from the towers, it'll extend their capabilities. And most of these applications are going to be batteries, solar powered, so they're going to need a very low power consuming device as far as, you know, the networking equipment. So maybe a router might consume too much power for how frequently the solar panel can recharge the battery while also running the additional systems. Heating stations, you know, also another remote monitoring application. You know, they just need very small amounts of data pushed back for historical recording, you know, for current monitoring. If you're kind of getting a feel for it now, you know, a lot of the DTU applications in narrowband and M1 are tied around just basic monitoring with low data output. And of course, from that, we have two part numbers particularly. Both of these SKUs cover the global market space. So you don't need, you know, 10 different products to cover 10 different regions. One product will support any region, whether it's M1 or narrowband. The only difference between the SKUs is one has the dual SIM capabilities. So with that said, you know, right now I'll open it up for any questions you guys might have. So looks like we already have two. Does it work on 4G networks, and what is your migration plans? From Luis. So actually all of category M1 and narrowband are based off of 4G. So if I was to clearly define them, I would say 4G category M1 or 4G, narrowband IoT. Now, essentially the carriers will determine when the coverage happens. They'll be using the same towers. They'll just be modifying equipment and software. For example, right now, Verizon claims in the States to have full M1 coverage. Wherever you have, 4G coverage, there's also M1 existing. So, and then for T-Mobile, you would have to refer to them as far as what regions are covered. Does that answer your question, Louise? All right, we'll jump on to Louise's second question. Does it include an NIC port or only serial ports? So currently it only includes serial port. It's 232 or 485, depending on your application and what type of protocols you're going to be using and converting. Remember, this isn't a routing product. It's specifically made for legacy equipment, which we know there's a lot of out there, where people want to move into IoT. They want to extend their capabilities, with new technology, but without the cost of having to go in and upgrade every single piece of equipment before buying the communication equipment. All right, looks like we got some from the chat. So Kelvin, let's see here. Luis, perfect, thank you. From John, this presentation be sent out to review if I have questions on the topic that were covered. Of course, John, we'd be more than happy to send this out, through your InHand sales rep, through the channels. It'll definitely be sent out. Any questions you have, you can always feel free to send to us or through our channels. Welcome, John. Do I have any other questions about the NDTU series? We could expand into M1 or narrowband, or about the applications that you would commonly see for these. Yes, it'll work with any carrier that supports one of these networks. So, for example, if you went to South Africa and they don't have a 4G, network that supports M1, then you would be lacking. But, our part number will work with any carrier that has a support of M1 or narrowband. And it'll be off of the same SKU. And I guess just to clarify even a step further into that, you could have one of these NDTU series deployed on, let's say, Verizon's M1 network. And if your company made the decision within a month that we're going to change to T-Mobile's narrowband IoT, then you could essentially take that device and plug in your new T-Mobile SIM card and it'll still work on that. Does that answer your question, George? Most welcome, George. Any other questions? Okay, from Louise, do you sell direct or through distributors? So at InHand Networks, to clarify, we are a manufacturer. So all of our sales go through our distribution channels. Now, if you'd like to start the process to tell us about your application, feel free to give InHand a call and then we'll direct you through the channels. We'll coordinate, we'll be there to provide support as necessary, but let me tell you, our channels are very good at what they do and sometimes they put me to shame. So I hope that answers your question as well, Luis. When will it be available? Well, the product is, technically it's already launched. This is kind of our first showcasing of it in a webinar. So it's already available. All you need to do, if you already have an InHand distribution channel you're working with, go ahead and ask them about it. And if you don't have a channel, give us a call and we'll get you set up with one.